guys, my name is GhettoASMR. Today we're going to do some lo-fi ASMR reading to help you fall asleep. I got two little books. We're going to do classics and Curious George Takes a Job. Curious George, the original. Let's start off with the original. We're going to get you super tingly, super relaxed, and let's begin. Very curious to see how good this book is. It's been a long time since I read this. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. One day George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. He put his hand on the ground, and of course George was curious. He came down from the tree to take a look at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and he put it on. The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a yellow boat. He put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble." George promised to be good, but it is easy for little monkeys to forget. On the deck he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally he had to try. It looked easy, but... Oh, what happened? First this and then this? Oh no. Where is George? The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. Man overboard, the sailors cried as they threw him a lifebelt. George caught it and held on. At last he was safe on board. Yes, he was safe. The G-Gang saved him. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore and onto the city to the man's house. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. A good pipe? What? What? A good pipe of what? What's he smoking, yo? Bruh. What? After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. Bruh, is he smoking some weed? Yo, the yellow man, wait, what? He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. Wait, that's not how I remember this story. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Obviously, he's high. He's high as fuck, dude. He's trimming balls. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun. Oh shit, no wonder. He smoked weed. That's how he got super crazy smart. Because he was a monkey, though. And he smoked weed, got all psychedelic. Ding-a-ling-ling. George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. Hello, hello, they said. But there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. Hurry, hurry, hurry. The firemen jumped onto the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, everyone out the way. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Caused a ruckus. The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. No fire. Only a naughty little monkey. "Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wire end. A thin fireman caught one arm, and a fat fireman caught the other. You fooled the fire department, they said. We will have to shut you up, or you can't do any more harm. They took him away and shut him in a prison. Doo-doo-doo. Oh no, not a prison. Cursed George. George wanted to get out. He climbed up through the window to try the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped up, and the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. Not as quick as me, though. He hurried through the building and out onto the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked onto the telephone wires quickly and quietly over the guard's head. George walked away. He was free. Freedom. Down in the street outside the prison wall stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself, but instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose. In an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Up the sail higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and the people like dolls. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first the wind blew in great gusts, then it quieted. Finally it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down he went, bump, onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do, and then he heard someone call George. He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons. And then George and the man climbed into the car, and at last away they went. To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live, man. Yeah. And then he got away again, and he made his way back to the G-Gang. And then the G-Gang said, though, yo, if you'd like in the streams, don't forget to drop thumbs up. You drop super chat, tip, PayPal, Patreon. He's like, I don't got no money. He's like, but I said, okay, drop thumbs up for now. But you gotta maybe get a job or something. So he did this. This is the story about how he got the job. And these are like, yeah, my two favorite Curious George books when I was a kid and stuff. So hopefully you guys can dig this one. So let's do this. Curious George Takes a Job. Oh wow, and it picks up right where we're at. This is pretty awesome. This is George. He lived in the zoo. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. He wanted to find out what was going on outside the zoo. For the G-Gang. Yeah, this is like the origins of Curious George. Pretty badass. Nowadays they have a TV show and stuff. I've never even seen that, but yeah, this is the origins. One day when the keeper was not paying attention, George got hold of the key of the cage. When the keeper discovered what had happened, it was too late. George was gone. Where was George? They took him everywhere, but they could not find him. George was hiding in the hay of his friend the elephant. Finally, the keepers gave up looking for him. George had found a nice cozy spot to sleep under the elephant's right ear, and the next morning before the zoo opened, he got away safely. Once in the street, George felt a little scared. What should he do in the big city? Maybe he could find his friend, the man with the yellow hat, who had brought him over from Africa a long time ago. Only George did not know where he lived. There was a bus stopping at the corner. George had never ridden one. Quickly he climbed a lamppost, jumped on top of the bus, and off they went. Now they were right in the center of the town. There was so much to see that George did not know where to look first. If only he could go on riding like this forever. But after a while, George got tired and a little dizzy. When the bus slowed down to turn into a side street, George jumped off. There was a restaurant right in front of him. Something smelled good. Suddenly, George felt very hungry. On the kitchen door stood up, and George walked in. On the table was a big pot. Of course, George was curious. He had to find out what was in it. Let's see. This light is just not really going to work with me. When the cook came back, he had a big surprise. Spaghetti was all over the place, and in the middle of it was a little monkey. George had been eating yards and yards, and had wanted himself all up in it. The cook was a kind man, and did not scold much, but George had to clean up the kitchen, and then do all the dishes. My, what a lot of them there were. The cook was watching George. "You are lucky to have 4 hands," he said. "You can do things twice as quickly." "I have a friend who could use a handy little fellow like you to wash windows. If you would like to, I will take you over to him." So they went down to the subway and took an uptown train to the cook's friend, who was an elevator man in a skyscraper. "Sure, I can use you," the elevator man said to George. "I will give you what you need for the job. You can start right away, but remember, you are here for washing windows. Never mind what people inside the house are doing. Don't be curious, or you'll get in trouble." George promised to be good, but little monkeys sometimes forget. George was ready to start. My, how many windows there were. But George got ahead quickly, since he worked with all 4 hands. He jumped from window to window, just as he had once jumped from tree to tree in the African jungle. For a while, George stuck to his work and did not pay any attention to the people inside. Of course, he was curious, but he remembered his promise. In one room, a little boy was crying because he did not want to eat his spinach. George did not even look, but went right on with his work. In another room, a man was taking a nap and snoring. George was sorry it was not his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He listened to the funny noise for a while, and then he went on working. But what was going on in here? George stopped working and pressed his nose against the window. 2 painters were working inside. George was fascinated. Painting looked a lot more fun than washing windows. The painters were getting ready to go out for lunch. The minute they left, George climbed inside. What wonderful paints and brushes they had. George could not resist. An hour later, the painters came back. They opened the door, and they stood there with their mouths wide open. The whole room had changed into a jungle with palm trees all over the walls, and a giraffe and 2 leopards and a zebra, and a little monkey was busy painting himself on one of the trees. Then the painters knew what had happened. Luckily, George was close to a door. He ran out as fast as he could. After him ran the 2 painters, then the elevator man, and then the woman who lived in the place. "Oh, my lovely room," cried the woman. "Don't let him get away." George headed for the fire escape. George reached the end of the fire escape. The others had not caught up with him yet. Here was his chance. They could not jump. But George could easily jump down and escape. In a moment he would be safe. Poor little George, he had forgotten that the pavement was as hard as stone, not like the soft grass of the jungle. Too bad the fall broke his leg, and an ambulance came to take George to the hospital. "He got what he deserved," said the woman, "making my apartment into a jungle indeed." I told him he would get into trouble," the elevator man added. He was too curious. George had to lie in bed with his leg held high up in a plaster cast. He was very unhappy, and all started out so nicely. If only he had not been so curious, he could have had a lot of fun. Now it was too late. The next morning, George's friend, the man with the big yellow hat, was buying his newspaper. Suddenly he got very excited. "This is George," he shouted when he saw the picture at the front page. Quickly he read the whole story and then ran to a telephone booth to ring the hospital. "I'm George's friend," he said to the nurse who answered the telephone. "Please take good care of him so that he will get better quickly. I want to take him to a movie studio and make a picture about his life in the jungle. Don't let him get into any more mischief until I can take him away. Finally, the day came when George could walk again. Your friend is going to take you away this morning, said the nurse. Just wait right here for him and don't touch anything. As soon as George was alone, he looked around at all the strange hospital things. I wonder what is in that big blue bottle, he thought. George was very curious. It smelled funny. Suddenly, his head began to turn. Then he felt as if he were flying. Then rings and stars danced before his eyes. Then everything went dark. Oh no. What's not dark? And this is how the man with the yellow hat found George when he came to call for him. They picked him up and shook him, but they could not wake him up. He was so fast asleep that he finally had to put him under the shower. How surprised he was when he woke up. Bro, George is always getting into some drugs and shit, man. George is crazy. Oh my god. George said goodbye to the nurse and the kind doctor. Then he and the man with the yellow hat got into the car to drive to the movie studio. In the president's office, George had to sign a contract. Now he was a movie actor. Bruh. Jump off the stairs, do some helium, become an actor. Sounds like a plan. In the studio, George was kept so busy all the time that he forgot to be curious. He liked the jungle they made for him, and he played happily there. And when the picture was finally finished, George invited all of his friends to see it. The doctor and the nurse and the ambulance driver and the man from the newsstand and the woman in the elevator man, the two painters and the cook and the reporter and the keepers of the zoo. Now the lights went out and the picture started. This is George, the voice began. He lived in the jungle. He was a good little monkey. He only had one fault. He was too curious. The end. And that's the story. I'm glad you were here, being curious at the tingles. Hopefully you got some, and hopefully you're feeling very relaxed and now about to fall asleep. Let me know in the comments if I should do more whispered reading. Reading Rainbow was a classic program I grew up watching and stuff, and yeah, Curious George's OG stuff, so